So, there are some people that are just ubiquitous throughout time. It's hard to find a person who doesn't know who Jim Carrey is, or Elvis Presley, or Napoleon Bonaparte. However, there are two stars of early film that have both remained popular. These are Charlie Chaplin and Keaton. Both were two of the biggest movie stars of the silent era, drawing large crowds and pushing the new medium to its limits. Now that it's been almost 100 years since the peak of their fame, it begs the question, which comedian holds up better in the modern day? Although Chaplin's character the Tramp has possibly remained more relevant in modern culture, data I collected seems to show that people consistently think Buster Keaton is the funnier comedian. If we take this to be true, it opens up a giant question. Why does Keaton hold up better than Chaplin? Today, I'll be exploring this question through the lens of different theories of humor to discern why. I pulled a cross-section of students on each actor's most well-known feature-length film, Sherlock Jr. for Buster Keaton, and City Lights for Charlie Chaplin. In a classroom of all cinema and media studies majors, the consensus was 12 out of 14 people thought Sherlock Jr. held up better and preferred Keaton to Chaplin. Thus, I continued to collect data across fields of studies on the two performances, and the trend continued. Ultimately, 76.2% of people thought Sherlock Jr. held up better, and 85.7% of people preferred Keaton over Chaplin. So, if Keaton is perceived to be funnier than Chaplin today, the question now is why. I decided to take each actor's top-rated film from IMDb, Payday for Chaplin and 1 Week for Buster Keaton, and analyze them to see if this hypothesis held true when comparing a different set of films. 1 Week is a film about a young pair's first week as a married couple. As they leave the wedding, they head to the location of their future home to find a Here's Your House portable home company set. The pair begin trying to build their house, and chaos ensues. The film employs several theories of humor to make it, even today, so funny. Right off the bat, when the attendees of the wedding start by throwing rice, but then throw shoes at the couple, we're getting a classic case of incongruity. The incongruity theory, which comes from Kant, this guy, states that we laugh because of the sudden transformation of a strained expectation into nothing, aka the ludicrousness of the reversal. The people start by throwing rice, which is expected, and then start throwing shoes, and we laugh at this reversal. Then, we laugh again when Keaton picks up a nice pair of shoes to take with him. Another bit of incongruity. Throughout the film, the building of the house gets increasingly ridiculous, until, by the end of it, it's run over by a train. Yet, we're never worried for anyone's safety, but rather impressed by the creativeness of the stunts. I think this is a form of the humor as play theory from George Santayana. This says that humor is a form of cooperative play, and laughter is thereby a signal that the events are to be interpreted as play. Additionally, in this situation, we know that it's a fictional film, and that these stunts were rehearsed and planned, which helps us to feel safe laughing. Payday, a film about a construction crewman, relies largely on the same sort of ideas with a lot of visual gags. So, what makes this film different? I believe there are two main theories the film relies on that causes it to not be as funny today. First is the semantic scripts theory, from Attardo and Raskin. This theory says that the activation of opposing semantic scripts and indexes is what makes something funny. Basically, there are these semantics codes we've all come to intuitively understand, and when they're reversed or opposed, we find it funny. But here's the thing about cultural indexes. They aren't stagnant. They change and transform, so what we find funny changes too. What made Chaplin so revolutionary and funny in his time is ultimately what makes him not as relevant today. His archetypal character, the Tramp, purposefully disrupts spaces and social norms and deals with the new realities of an industrial world, and thus relies on specific semantic scripts and indexes of the period. Some of these scripts still remain, but many of them have changed. We don't even have the concept of a tramp anymore. For example, a large section of the film relies on the elevator gag, with items and people traveling up and down, just missing disaster. This is still funny now, but in a different way than it was then. The first elevator was patented in 1887 by Alexander Miles, and by 1900 automated elevators were available, but people were reticent to use them. This was a relatively new technology in 1922, and one that most people certainly weren't used to using. So this elevator joke meant something very different in 1922 when the film was made than it does now. On the other hand, the trope of the married couple's first week and the frustrations of putting together one's first home still very much exists. I mean, look at IKEA. Sure, the script has transformed, but the same basic concept of this semantic script still applies today. There's also a huge difference between the way Keaton and Chaplin end up in their funny situations. Chaplin actively puts himself into situations. He hits other people with shovels, with mops. He ignores his wife. He does things to other people that are funny. Keaton, meanwhile, passively ends up the victim of the joke. He's just a normal, awkward guy who gets into precarious situations. This draws upon the superiority theory from Plato. You know, that guy that some kid talked about non-stop about in your required philosophy class? This theory states that we laugh at the misfortunes of others and find joy in feeling superior. With Keaton, we are laughing at the situations he gets himself into. But for Chaplin, we're often laughing at the people he's bothering, no matter what his intention is. It is funny that he's going into spaces and disrupting them, messing with people and standards, but it can all start to feel a little cruel. It's like pranks. Sometimes when pranks go too far or the other person hasn't consented, it doesn't feel funny anymore. But also, Keaton's awkwardness makes him more relatable. He's merely an everyman with a blank face who ends up in ridiculous scenarios, whereas Chaplin plays the clown. It's funny to see a normal person end up in crazy situations, because that's what happens with us as well. It's just easier to laugh at Keaton in this day and age. So, at this point in the video, you may be thinking, well, this analysis is all well and good, but this seems pretty subjective. You're not wrong. In case it wasn't clear, I generally prefer Keaton, though I do like Chaplin. So I hosted a few screenings of the two shorts for various groups of people to see if my hypothesis proved to be true. The results were super fascinating. Ultimately, 85.7% of people preferred 1 week over Payday, a pretty strong majority. However, when asked whose performance they preferred, only 66.7% of people preferred Keaton over Chaplin. Based on people's comments, this largely depended on what people looked for in a performance. For example, people who preferred 1 week said that they preferred Chaplin's performance over Keaton because he seemed to be acting more, playing a character that was different than who he was as a person. However, people who preferred Keaton liked that his performance was more realistic and deadpan and less, quote, clown-like. I also tested for demographics to see if there was any correlation between which comedian people preferred and a certain factor. None of the original factors I tested for, gender, whether or not they studied film, correlated at all with the results. However, there's something I realized after I collected the data. The first screening was held amongst a group of students, many of them first years in the college. Of the data collected from this group, 100% of people polled preferred 1 week over Payday. In general, people seemed far more engaged with Keaton, saying things such as, "Buster Keaton kinda cute though," or "People be like, yo, Chaplin's strong guy. He's not," and "Buster Keaton was a snack." The room was highly engaged, people were laughing, with the spinning house bit being the group's overwhelmingly favorite part. When Payday started, the room became far more distracted and someone actually said, "I haven't been watching this." Additionally, the screening started out with 20 plus people, and by the time Payday ended, we only had 9, and only those 9 people took the survey. So had the other 11 taken it, even more people would have expressed their preference for Keaton. The second group of people surveyed were adults over the age of 50. 60% of that group preferred Payday and Chaplin. I believe this data supports my theory that Chaplin's humor largely comes from cultural semantic scripts. This would explain why people over 50 consistently found Chaplin funnier. The semantic scripts employed in Chaplin's films would be more legible to people who were raised when they were more relevant. Meanwhile, for the younger people, these semantic scripts don't relate to them, so they look for the humor in things that are legible to them, more universal aspects of humor. The question I sought to answer was, does Buster Keaton hold up better than Charlie Chaplin, and why? I believe that data and analysis of the films demonstrates that Keaton holds up better than Chaplin. However, this does not mean that Keaton is objectively funnier than Chaplin. The data also shows that many people found Chaplin funny, even if they did prefer 1 week. At the end of the day, I don't know if anyone can say that one thing is objectively funnier than another, but as I have shown, Keaton holds up better, and to quote something someone actually submitted to my survey, quote, "Chaplin makes my ass itch," end quote.